Hello and welcome to LSC Focus. So Liverpool are at last back in European action this weekend after what was I think it's fair to say, fantastic campaign for them in the Champions League last season. It's really exciting for the team to get off and running in Tuesday's game, and it's of course a massive time to kick things off against PSG. I mean, if you ask me, it's probably our biggest game of the season, even ahead of the Spurs match, and partially because I think this one is actually a must-win. You know, I think with the Spurs game, as great as it was to win it and keep up the 100% record and everything, we probably could have got away with a draw in that. If we'd come away with just 1 point in an away game at Wembley, you would have said, actually, fair enough, that's not too bad. But with this game against PSG, I think with the fact that we've got Napoli afterwards, away from home, which is going to be such a difficult tie, I think a win is so important here, because if we get 3 points in this match, and then whatever happens against Napoli happens, and then we've got that double header against Red Star Belgrade as well, which is such a huge opportunity to pick up 6 points from 6 possible points with those 2 games, then I think we would end up being off to a flyer and could even confirm qualification from the Champions League group before we even get to the 5th game or anything like that. So I do think it's so vital that Liverpool win this game, and also I think it's really important that we show that our European form is here to stay, because plenty of people will be already trying to get in first in terms of writing us off and saying that last season was a fluke, it was just a freak set of circumstances that allowed us to get to the final. We've already got people saying that we had it easy with the games against Porto and Roma in the semi-final and stuff like that. So I think it is important that Liverpool show that they are going to be a European force for many years to come, and that's an important thing about when you think about the club's trajectory as a whole, because one of the most successful eras in Liverpool recent history, you know, certainly since like the induction of the Premier League and the downfall of what was such an amazing era of dominance in the 80s or something like that, one of the best eras of dominance for Liverpool was when they were fantastic year in, year out in Europe under Rafa Benitez. You know, I think there was even a point when they got top of the coefficient rankings, and they're reaching pretty much the semi-finals or at worst the quarter-finals every single year. And I think it's so important to Liverpool's success and to establish our identity again as a successful club to be winning on the European stage. And I think a win against PSG would go a long way to establishing that. Now, obviously it's at Anfield as well, which many would see as an advantage for Liverpool. PSG haven't really experienced an atmosphere much like this so far in the Champions League, and I think it's fair to say their European form, especially away from home, and that's something that I think will come into play for Liverpool in this game. Their European form is ever so slightly patchy, whereas Liverpool obviously seem to know a bit more about what they're doing on the European stage. But crucially, their manager is Thomas Tuchel, who did manage Borussia Dortmund when we beat them 4-3 at Anfield in that incredible comeback win. So whereas in the past we've had like Man City and Hoffenheim last season, and I think Shakhtar Donetsk, all those teams were coming to Anfield being like, oh, we won't be affected by the atmosphere. European nights at Anfield are a myth. They're not really that bad. Thomas Tuchel knows that a European night at Anfield alone is enough of a handicap to prevent your team from winning straight away before the game has even kicked off. So obviously he's already going to be trying to get into his players' heads, make them realise how difficult this game is going to be, make them realise how much the atmosphere will potentially affect their performance. But as always, European night at Anfield, we've got to do everything we can to get behind the team and hopefully win what I do think will be our biggest game of the season so far. So looking at team news going into the game, the big story is of course about Roberto Firmino and whether or not he will be available after his eye injury at the weekend. Now thankfully it's nowhere near as bad as first thought, and he's put out all these messages on Instagram and everything saying he's fine, his eye is fine, and he's travelled back to Merseyside and everything now, so everything seems okay there, although apparently there will be a set of like extra tests over the next few days, and he will be assessed before the match. So we don't know 100% whether or not he's going to play the game, but the signs all do seem to be positive. So unless he regresses or anything like that, or something doesn't heal as well as it's supposed to, I'm not necessarily an eye doctor specialist or anything like that, so I can't necessarily comment in that amount of detail. But at the moment it does feel like he's fairly likely to start. I mean, obviously if he is injured, he will play no part whatsoever, because we've got to be safe, and if his eye's not working properly, he's not going to be very good at football, because he's going to have no depth perception. He's not going to be able to work out where the ball is or anything like that. But hopefully Roberto Firmino will be fine. There will obviously be an assessment, I think, on the day of the game, so we'll know a little bit more on Tuesday morning. Apart from that, no real fresh injury concerns, but I think there's a lot to be said about whether or not Liverpool will rotate for this game, because it is, of course, our first weekend to midweek cycle, and you'd hope that we sort of get used to that later on in the season and we'll be able to play pretty much the same 11. But I think Jurgen Klopp will certainly stop and assess his players in training and see who's recovered well from the Spurs game and see who might need a few extra days to recover and might come back in the Southampton game or something like that. But obviously, being against PSG, we can't really afford to rest any players. We want to play all of our starting 11 that we know has the best chance of this winning game. So predicting how we're actually going to line up, I think it has to be Alisson in goal. You know, there was a mad news article that came out recently that said Mignolet will not be used in European competition for Liverpool, and you're kind of like, well, obviously, because we paid 67 million quid for this goalkeeper and we want to win the Champions League. So absolutely no surprises there that Alisson will be starting this game. Hopefully he can keep another one of those incredible clean sheets, and we might finally see him tested properly, because so far he hasn't really had much to do in most of the games. He's obviously conceded a couple, one that you could put a lot of blame on him, one against Spurs that wasn't really his fault at all, it was just a really good shot. But it would be interesting to see what happens if PSG had like 5 really clear-cut chances or anything like that, and see how Alisson copes with them, because that's when he was at his best in the Champions League last season. I think the game where he announced himself was a game against Atletico Madrid at the Stadio Olimpico, where it ended up 0-0, and Atletico had a lot of clear chances that they couldn't put away, and a lot of that was down to the fact that Alisson Becker put in a fantastic goalkeeping performance. So hopefully we see another great game from him. The back four, I think, is unchanged. Trent Alexander-Arnold has to play right back. Gomez and Virgil van Dijk, absolutely immense at the weekend. I'm really excited by how Joe Gomez is coming along. I think his progress is so rapid and interesting to see where he's going to go. I think he is just going to hopefully end up being one of the best centre-backs in the country. He's certainly headed that way, and he isn't too bad at the moment either. So Gomez and Van Dijk to be the centre-back pairing, and then Andrew Robertson at left-back. And the midfield is where I think we might see a little bit of rotation. And obviously, this all comes down to what the manager sees on the training ground, so it is a little bit hard to predict, because like I said, all the decisions will be made when they all come back in training and he assesses who's fit and who's ready and who looks like they might need a few more days. Now, I get the feeling that James Milner might just need a little bit of a rest, because as good as he has been so far this season, he ran like 12.9 kilometres at the weekend against Wembley. He really put in a massive shift in that game, and he was so good for us, and I'd love to have him in this game, but there's always someone who needs to be dropped out of the midfield, and if he ran that much, and at his age, as fit as he is, as well drilled as he is, he's going to need a rest every now and then. I can see Milner possibly being dropped out of the side to have a rest, and then, who knows, maybe making a half-hour cameo at the end or something like that. So I reckon the midfield is going to be Jordan Henderson at the base, starting his second game of the season, and then Gini Wijnaldum a little bit further forward, and that's going to be interesting how that one might turn out, and I think that's where you could maybe consider bringing in James Milner, because Gini Wijnaldum so far this season has been at his best in that number 6 role, and I think it would almost be cruel not to play him there, but if we're not playing Milner, it'd be a bit weird to play Henderson further forward as well. So I think Henderson is the deep line midfielder, Wijnaldum a little bit ahead of him, but they can always function as a double number 6 system, because PSG have so much attacking threat. You know, you've got Neymar, Cavani, Mbappe. They might play Di Maria as well, and they've got some great midfielders as well. So it might make sense to play 2 defensive midfielders in that situation. And then Keita, I think, plays a little bit further forward. Going to be really exciting to see how he gets on in this game, because I think he will get a lot of space in midfield, maybe a little bit more time on the ball as well, and it'd be really great to see how he fares under the lights on a big European night for Liverpool. And then the front three, obviously there's doubts about Firmino's availability, but I think it has to be Salah, Firmino and Mane, and I think it will be interesting what we do if Firmino is injured, because I think you've got a couple of options there. You can either play Sturridge down the middle, or potentially even out wide and put Salah down the middle, or you can almost put Shaqiri in as a false 9 with Salah and Mane a little bit further ahead either side of him, sort of half Firmino role, half essentially as a number 10, or even again have Salah in the middle and Shaqiri out wide. So if Firmino is injured, I think it'll be really interesting to see how Liverpool cope with that situation, but at the moment I think it's fairly likely that Firmino will play. So taking a look at PSG then, obviously it's a bit difficult to assess how they'll turn out for this game, because they have had a really good start to the season so far in Ligue 1. They've won every single game, they haven't conceded too many apart from that mad 4-2 win they had away from home. But I think what is very interesting as well is the fact that they rested Neymar at the weekend, and obviously with Mbappe suspended as well, that means both of those players, even though PSG played on Friday, so so they had a fair amount of time to get rested anyway. They should be potentially fit and firing for PSG in this game, but you've also got to take into account the fact that that could potentially affect their match rhythm as well, especially given that they've only just got back from international break, so it's been a while since they've played a game for PSG. And when I think about Liverpool, there are some players like FIRMINO and other players in the team as well who I think actually play better when they are playing more regularly, when they're playing twice a week. So it will be interesting to see whether they start slowly or whether they do come flying out the blocks because they've had that little bit of rest. But if anything, it is certainly a huge compliment to Liverpool that they are willing to sacrifice or make those sacrifices in the league, even though they did end up winning 4-0 eventually, because that's the French league for you. But they're willing to take those kind of risks to try and give themselves the best possible chance of winning at Anfield. Now, like I said, because it's the French league, we don't really know how they're going to set up, and they have sort of tinkered with their formation a little bit so far this season. I think they have done a little bit of a back three where it's been Kimpembe, Marquinhos and Thiago Silva. If you ask me, that would be great if they played a back three, and it's something that is possible because if they are looking to be a little bit more defensive, they might think that having that extra centre-back in there could be really valuable. But a back three against Liverpool's front three, as we've seen in the past, doesn't go together very well. It's a really difficult system to defend if you're playing defenders in a three. Certainly if you don't play a three all the time as well, because they are going to struggle with positioning and stuff like that, and they could certainly get caught out by Liverpool's fluid movement in that attacking line. Obviously a lot of that also depends on how well our front three plays. I feel like this is really the kind of game where you want to see them hit the best heights that we saw last season, because all the way through this season so far, as well as we played and we've won 5 games and it's all been very fantastic and we've still been scoring goals as well, a lot of people have been saying that the front three hasn't really clicked yet. And I think this game, in the kind of circumstances where we played our best football last season, is a great situation to try and get them off the mark and try and get them playing to the standard that they showed at their very best last season. So PSG could play a back three to try and deal with that. I think it's very interesting how they've lined up in terms of their midfield as well, because it looks like they've played a 4-2-3-1 quite a lot, where they play 2 midfielders, sometimes 2 quite attacking midfielders as well. They've done stuff where it's like, I think it's Verratti and then Rabiot, which both of them want to get forward quite a lot, especially Rabiot, who we've learned a lot about him since he was linked with Liverpool. He's got a little bit of a reputation for being undisciplined positionally and in terms of the effort he puts in as well. So that would certainly be a huge risk from PSG, especially if they go with the front 4 they've essentially put out, where it's Cavani up top and then I think Neymar, Di Maria and Mbappe behind him. As good as those players are, and Liverpool will have to be very wary of their threat, I can't see them doing too much work in midfield. And with how hard our midfielders work, and that's one of the reasons that I would still quite like to see James Milner, I'd be a little bit worried as a PSG fan that they could get overrun in the middle of the park. And obviously, if Liverpool win the midfield battle, that puts them on course to win the game and potentially win it by a cricket score. So I think there are certainly some unsettling questions around PSG if you're a PSG fan, because I don't think they really know how to set up for this game. And if they are going to tinker with their system to try and deal with Liverpool, and obviously it's a huge step up from playing in the French league to playing away at Anfield on a European night, and that's something that they have to cope with as well. I'd be worried that they would be unsettled as well. Like I said, if they switch to a back three, that's a really difficult system to deal with if you don't play in it regularly. And similar with if they try and overload the midfield and add an extra player there, that could upset their attack as well if they take Di Maria out and put in a more combative midfield or anything like that. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how PSG line up. And as a Liverpool fan, I take a lot of positives from the fact that they are going to have to fiddle with their system in some way to try and deal with us, and that will hopefully unsettle them and give us a huge chance to win this game, get off to a flyer in the Champions League, get those 3 points, take them to Naples and hopefully get another good result there. But yeah, all things considered, I'm really excited for this game. You should be too. Hopefully it's a Liverpool win. That is all for today's video. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, why not give it a like? If you're new around here as well, hit that subscribe button there. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days as well. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back on Tuesday night after we have hopefully walloped PSG in the Champions League. Bye for now.